14th of February, 1943. 07:43 hours. The Fade Pass, Tunisia. From the open commander's hatch of his Crusader Mark III, Lieutenant Alastair Finch of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, 7th Armoured Division, the Desert Rats, scanned the shimmering horizon through his field glasses. The morning air was still cool, a temporary mercy before the Saharan sun began its daily assault, but the taste of dust was already thick on his tongue. What he saw through the magnified, wavering air made the blood in his veins turn to glacial ice. 5 of them. 5 Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tigers, advancing in a staggered line from the east, their boxy, monstrous shapes growing larger with each passing second. Even from 1,000 yards out, the silhouette was brutally unmistakable, a profile already burned into the nightmares of every Allied tanker in North Africa. The long, lethal barrel of the 88mm kilowatt K-36 gun. The slab of 100mm Krupp steel that formed its frontal armor. The sheer, ground-crushing presence of 57 tons of Teutonic engineering designed for one purpose: to dominate and destroy. Finch lowered his binoculars, the metal cool against his sweaty palms, and cast a glance over his own machine. The Crusader III. A respectable cruiser tank, certainly, but it weighed in at a paltry 19 tons. Its frontal armor was a laughable 51mm at its thickest point. And its main armament, the Ordnance QF 6-pounder, was a fine, effective gun against Panzer IIIs and IVs, but against a Tiger. The lads had already christened it the door knocker. The brutal mathematics of their situation laid themselves bare in Finch's mind, cold and absolute. The Tiger's 88mm cannon could punch clean through his Crusader's armor from well over a mile away. His own 6-pounder, even with the best armor-piercing shot, couldn't hope to penetrate the Tiger's front glacis plate from any distance. Not just a long distance. Any distance. Fired from point-blank range, the 57mm shell would ricochet off that hardened steel with a pathetic shriek, like a child throwing a pebble against the walls of a medieval fortress. Under his command, Finch had a troop of 4 Crusaders. 18 men, including himself. Across the scrubland, the 5 Tigers held 25 crewmen and a combined weight of nearly 285 tons of rolling steel. Orthodox military doctrine screamed at him with the force of a parade ground drill sergeant. Retreat. Pull back immediately, find a defensible wadi, call for artillery support. Wait for the squadron's Sherman tanks, which he knew were lumbering along a full 5 miles to the west. But Alastair Finch knew something. He had a piece of intelligence, gleaned not from a high-command briefing, but from painstaking hours spent poring over after-action reports by flickering lantern light. It was a small detail, an easily overlooked flaw in the beast's design. And that single piece of knowledge was about to dictate the next 23 minutes of his life, and the lives of the 17 men who trusted him. If you want to witness how 4 British cruiser tanks took on 5 Tigers and lived to tell the tale, make sure you press that like button. This is a story that deserves to be remembered. The tale of the Crusader tank in the Second World War is one of a thoroughbred designed for a race it was seldom allowed to run. Conceived in the late 1930s, it was a cruiser tank, built for speed and exploitation, intended to sweep through gaps in the enemy line like mechanized cavalry. It wasn't designed for slogging matches against heavily armored behemoths. But when war came, you fought with the army you had, not the army you wanted. And in the unforgiving crucible of the North African desert, the Crusader was what the British Army had in abundance. So, it was sent into the fray against the ever-improving German panzers. The results were often tragic. During the brutal battles around Gazala and the infamous Cauldron, scores of Crusaders were brewed up, their thin armor no match for the long-range guns of the Panzer IV Specials or the dreaded 88mm anti-tank guns. The arrival of the Tiger in Tunisia seemed to be the final nail in the coffin. German tank crews developed an open contempt for the British cruiser tanks, dismissing them as Blechspielzeug, tin toys. Captured German intelligence reports described the Crusader as fragile and utterly unsuitable for engaging heavy tanks. What the German analysts, in their rigid focus on firepower and armor thickness, failed to appreciate was that the Crusader possessed 2 crucial advantages that no German heavy tank could ever hope to match. The first was speed. The Crusader, with its powerful Liberty engine, could achieve a blistering 27 miles per hour across the rough desert terrain. The Tiger, by contrast, was a sluggish beast, managing perhaps 12 miles per hour on a good day over the same ground. The British tank was more than twice as fast. The second advantage was agility. The Crusader could execute a full 360-degree hull traverse, spinning on its own axis, in a little over 5 seconds. The ponderous Tiger needed a gut-wrenching 20 seconds to perform the same maneuver. The Crusader was nearly 4 times more nimble. In a head-on duel, these advantages were utterly meaningless. But Lieutenant Finch had no intention of fighting a head-on duel. He had spent weeks studying the reports from the 8th Army's clashes with the first Tigers to arrive in theater. He had read the accounts, noted the shell trajectories, the engagement ranges, and the crew testimonies. And in those dry, technical documents, he had discovered the Tiger's Achilles heel. It wasn't the side armor, still a formidable 80 mm. It wasn't the rear armor, also 80 mm. It wasn't even the thinner top armor. The Tiger's critical weakness lay in its turret. The Tiger employed a sophisticated hydraulic traverse system. It was powerful and precise, capable of moving the immense 11-ton turret with pinpoint accuracy. But it was also agonizingly, fatally slow. To complete a single 360-degree rotation, the Tiger's turret needed a full 60 seconds. 1 minute. In the frantic, split-second world of tank combat, a minute was an eternity. By contrast, the Crusader's simpler, lighter mechanical traverse system could whip its 2.5-ton turret around in just 14 seconds. Finch did the arithmetic in his head, a calculation that was equal parts trigonometry and a prayer. If a Crusader could move fast enough, it could stay outside the Tiger's main gun arc. The Tiger would be forced to turn its turret to engage, and in those precious seconds of hydraulic whining, the Crusader could change position again. It was, he mused, a fight between a bear and a swarm of wasps. The bear was infinitely stronger, larger, and more lethal. But it couldn't kill what it couldn't hit. At 0744, Finch made his decision. He wasn't going to pull back. He wasn't going to wait for the Shermans. He was going to attack. He lifted the radio handset, the Bakelite cool and smooth in his hand, and pressed the transmit button. The operators in the other 3 Crusaders listened to the order, their minds struggling to process what they were hearing over the crackle of the wireless. Hello all stations, this is Sunray. Form wedge. We are advancing on the enemy armor. Full chat. Over. A moment of static-laced silence, then the voice of Sergeant Evan Davies, a grizzled veteran from the Welsh Valleys commanding the 2nd Tank, crackled back. Sunray, say again your last. Did you say advance? Over. Affirmative, Sergeant, Finch replied, his voice betraying none of the cold fear coiling in his stomach. Full chat. Hold your fire until my command. When we do open up, aim for the tracks. I repeat, aim for the tracks, not the hull. Over. Davies offered no further argument, just a curt, Wilco, out. But Finch could vividly imagine the look on his face, a mixture of disbelief and the grim resignation of a man who had seen too many young officers with bright ideas. At 0746, 4 British Crusader tanks, engines roaring in protest, lurched forward and began to accelerate towards 5 German Tigers. The initial distance was just over 1,000 yards. The German commanders, observing from their own cupolas, could scarcely believe their eyes. In a captured after-action report, Oberleutnant Klaus Richter of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion would later write, "We assumed it was a reconnaissance in force, or perhaps a feint to draw our fire. No sane commander would frontally assault Tigers with cruiser tanks. We expected them to break off at any moment." But the Crusaders didn't break off. They kept coming, low-slung and fast, kicking up plumes of ochre dust behind them. 1,000 yards. 900. 800. At 800 yards, the Tigers opened fire. The world dissolved into a series of deafening cracks as the 88 spoke. The first shell screamed over Finch's turret with the sound of tearing linen. The second slammed into the ground 30 yards to his left, erupting in a geyser of sand and rock that hammered against his tank's hull. The third passed clean between two of his tanks, harmlessly continuing its journey into the vast emptiness of the desert. The Germans were missing, and Finch knew precisely why. The Tiger was a weapon system designed for long-range, deliberate combat. Its superb optics and gun were calibrated for targets moving at the typical battlefield speed of 10 to 15 miles per hour. The Crusaders were barreling towards them at nearly 30. The German gunners, trained in methodical precision, couldn't correctly calculate the deflection. Their shells were consistently landing behind their targets. They were aiming where the Crusaders had been, not where they were. 700 yards. 600. The British tanks continued their mad dash, holding their fire. Inside the cramped, vibrating hulls, the crews were living on pure adrenaline, feeling every near miss as a physical blow, every shockwave shaking their 19-ton vehicles like a dog shaking a rat. At 500 yards, Finch gave his second order, his voice sharp and clear over the din. "Hello all stations. Fan out. 1 and 3, take the left flank. 2 and 4, right flank. Keep moving. Go, go, go." This was the critical moment, the hinge upon which the entire gamble would swing. Like a fan opening, the 4 Crusaders peeled away from their wedge formation. Each pair veered sharply, racing towards the opposite sides of the German tank line. The Germans were now faced with a tactical dilemma. Their turrets were all pointing forwards, towards the space the Crusaders had occupied mere seconds before. But the targets were gone, vanishing into clouds of their own dust, moving far faster than the Tiger's hydraulic systems could ever hope to track. If you are still watching, you are a part of this story. Subscribe to Tales of Valor to see how this impossible engagement concluded. What unfolded over the next 12 minutes was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, a fluid, desperate ballet of steel that would be studied in tank tactics manuals for decades to come. At 07:52, Finch's Crusader completed its flanking maneuver. He was now 300 yards from the nearest Tiger, positioned at a perfect 90-degree angle to the front of the German tank. The massive turret of the Tiger began its slow, inexorable turn towards him, the whine of its hydraulic motors a clear threat even over the roar of his own engine. Finch wasn't about to wait the 15 seconds it would take to bring that gun to bear. Gunner, traverse right. Target lead Tiger, left-hand track. Fire. The 6-pounder barked, the breech recoiling violently in the cramped turret. The shot, fired from a moving platform at a stationary target 300 yards away, struck exactly where Finch had intended. Not against the impregnable hull, but against the exposed tracks. The Tiger's tracks were its only vulnerability the 6-pounder could reliably affect. They weren't hardened armor plate, they were complex assemblies of steel links and pins. A direct hit could shatter a link or break a pin. The first shot ricocheted off a road wheel with a shower of sparks. The second went wide. The third slammed into the Tiger's rear idler wheel. It didn't sever the track, but it visibly damaged the tensioning system, causing the track to sag. The Tiger's turret continued its deliberate turn. 10 seconds. 11 seconds. 12. Driver, forward. Move us now, Finch yelled. The Crusader leaped ahead, changing its position by 50 yards. Just as the Tiger's turret finally aligned, its 88mm cannon spat fire. The shell obliterated a rocky outcrop precisely where Finch's tank had been standing a moment before. And then Finch saw something that changed the entire complexion of the battle. While he had been dueling with the lead Tiger, Sergeant Davies, leading the pair on the right flank, had executed his own brilliant maneuver. He had pushed his Crusader right around to the rear of the German formation and done something no textbook would ever advise. He had fired on the rearmost Tiger not at its tracks, but at the engine deck. The rear armor plate of the Tiger was 80mm thick, impenetrable. But the engine louvers, the slatted metal grills designed to allow ventilation for the 700 horsepower Maybach engine, were not armor. They were simple steel mesh. Davies's 57mm armor-piercing round sliced through the grille as if it were cheesecloth and smashed into the engine's radiator block. There was no explosion, no dramatic plume of fire. Just a sudden, telltale wisp of white steam, quickly followed by a cascade of escaping coolant fluid pouring onto the hot sand. In 3 minutes, that Tiger's engine would overheat and seize. Davies hadn't killed the Tiger, but he had given it a fatal heart attack. The fight raged for another 15 minutes. The 4 Crusaders maintained constant, fluid motion, circling the increasingly bewildered Tigers like a pack of wolves harrying wounded bison. They fired a total of 147 6-pounder shells. The vast majority glanced harmlessly off the thick German armor, but 23 of them found their mark on critical points: tracks, drive sprockets, engine grills, vision periscopes, radio antennae. At 0806, the lead Tiger, the one Finch had first engaged, shuddered to a halt. Its right track, weakened by 3 consecutive hits on the same link, had finally snapped. At 0809, the second Tiger lost power, its engine seizing with a final, agonized groan as the last of its coolant boiled away. At 0811, the 3 remaining, fully operational Tigers began to reverse. They weren't technically defeated. Not a single Crusader had managed to penetrate their main armor. They retreated because they had lost all tactical cohesion. A Tiger with a broken track is a formidable pillbox, but it cannot maneuver. A Tiger with a dead engine is a magnet for the artillery and air support that would surely follow. The German commander made a pragmatic choice. He abandoned his 2 crippled behemoths and withdrew with his 3 operational tanks. At 0819, the engagement was over. 4 M3 Crusader tanks had faced 5 Tigers. The result: 2 Tigers neutralized, 3 in retreat. 0 Crusaders destroyed. It wasn't a victory in the conventional sense. The British tankers hadn't knocked out a single Tiger. But they had achieved something the manuals insisted was impossible. They had forced a vastly superior enemy force to withdraw, without the loss of a single one of their own men or machines. Lieutenant Alastair Finch was later awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his actions that day. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and tactical ingenuity in the face of superior enemy armored forces." But the true legacy of that brief, violent skirmish in the Fade Pass wasn't a medal pinned to a tunic. It was a quiet revolution in British armored doctrine. Finch's after-action report, concise and meticulously detailed, made its way up the chain of command, eventually landing on a desk in Whitehall in March 1943. The staff officers and analysts noted something profound. The Crusader troop hadn't won through brute force or firepower. It had won through movement. Speed, agility, the exploitation of specific, technical weaknesses, and above all, a refusal to fight the kind of battle the enemy wanted to fight. These principles were absorbed into what became the cornerstone of British cruiser tank doctrine for the remainder of the war. Light and medium tanks would no longer be thrown into frontal assaults against German heavy armor. They would be used precisely as Finch had used his: to flank, to harass, to disable. By the war's end, the Cromwells and Comets that succeeded the Crusader had accounted for hundreds of German tanks, not by slugging it out, but by crippling their tracks and running gear, damaging their engines, and leaving them stranded and vulnerable for the artillery or the Typhoons of the RAF to finish the job. The Germans never stopped calling them tin toys, but after February 1943, they began to fear them. Not for what they could destroy, but for what they couldn't catch. Alastair Finch survived the war. He was captured in a later engagement in April 1943, just weeks after his famous encounter, and spent 2 years as a prisoner of war in Germany. After his liberation, he remained in the army, rising to the rank of brigadier and serving as a much-respected instructor at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. He passed away peacefully in 1989. His brief obituary in the Times mentioned his distinguished service and his family. It failed to mention that, on one cold desert morning, he had led 4 tin toys against 5 Tigers and made them run. Sometimes, victory isn't measured in enemies destroyed. Sometimes, it is measured in surviving when no one thought it possible. Sometimes, the smaller tank wins, precisely because it refuses to fight the battle the bigger tank expects. What do you think of this David versus Goliath tactic? Did you know about the tiger's hidden vulnerabilities? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to Tales of Valor. Each week, we bring you verified, incredible stories from military history that challenge everything you thought you knew. Activate the notification